Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about leadership, communication, presentation skills, and really how to be a better leader in this world. This is not my standard introduction because this is the second to last episode of the podcast for the moment. At the end of the year, we're going to go on hiatus while we do some reorganization and rethinking. So I was thinking, who did I want to feature for the second to last episode? Last one's going to be me talking about what I learned. And I thought about my wonderful friend, Ukeme Awakessien Jeter. Ukeme was on the podcast a couple of years ago, talking about her journey as an immigrant, having gone to college in the US and then became an engineer. Then she became a lawyer, and then she became elected to politics. And now she's a mayor. So she's really had this amazing blossoming, and she's also an author. So she's one of my favorite people ever. And I just thought, let me bring her in to wrap up 5 years of podcasting with one of the smartest people I know. Here is her official bio. Ukeme Awakessien Jeter has made history. In 2021, she became the first person of color to be elected to the Upper Arlington City Council in Ohio. That's outside Columbus, Ohio. It is the first time in its 103-year history. And in January of 2024, she proudly became the first person of color to be selected by her peers on the council to serve as president and mayor. Ukeme is recognized as a trailblazer. She was named by the Columbus, Ohio CEO magazine as one of its future 50 leaders. Professionally, Ukeme began her career as an engineer, and after almost a decade doing that, she became a lawyer. Today, she's a partner at Taft Law in Columbus, and her practice focuses on helping her clients bring innovative products and services to market through negotiating and structuring intellectual property licenses and related agreements. She thrives on tackling complex challenges in the realm of product development and is a true catalyst for innovation. Beyond her career and her service to Upper Arlington, Ukeme is a tireless advocate for the causes of access, equity, and inclusion. She serves on the board of directors for Ohio Legal Help, which is a startup nonprofit that leverages technology and innovation to improve justice and fairness for all Ohioans. And her debut book, Immigrant: How Immigrant Leadership Drives Business Success, offers valuable insights for business leaders seeking to cultivate a culture that maximizes the potential of immigrant leadership. She is a caring mother for 2 wonderful children and a dog. She received a JD from Case Western Reserve University School of Law, an MBA from the University of Massachusetts, and a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Maine, where she was also a college athlete in track and field. Ukeme is a shining star, very smart, and had some really interesting ideas about immigrant leadership and why it's important. We're focusing mostly on the book, Immigrant, today. I know you'll enjoy the episode. I know you'll enjoy the conversation. On to Ukeme. Ukeme, my friend, I am so glad I finally got you back onto the podcast. The interview that we did a couple years ago is one of the most popular ones I've ever had. So welcome.
Oh, oh, it's good to be back. Sorry it's taking so long, but
All
I'm
right, well, you're a
back.
busy lady, so yeah, exactly. So before I get into all the cool things I want to ask you, let me
Yeah.
ask about who would be your dream interview. So if you could
Mm,
interview someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
yeah, that's an easy answer for me. Shirley Chisholm. She was the first Black woman, first Black Congresswoman in the United States, and she was the first Black woman to run for president.
Hmm.
Uh, I have a lot of her sayings around my house. In fact, I dressed up as her for Halloween last year. I think a conversation with her, the people I'd love to have in the room are emerging leaders, young women.
Hmm.
And why it's important to have those people is sometimes history may seem so far away, but she's navigated some of the dynamics that we're
Hmm.
experiencing today, having been the first. I mean, we just came off a historic election, and understand. I mean, she's known for being the woman that says if they don't invite you to the table, bring a folding chair. She said that
Uh-huh.
like 50, 60 years ago.
Uh-huh.
We're still bringing folding chairs to tables that were perceived not to be at. So I think she would have some great insights from her time that would shed some light on some of the things and experiences that young women and emerging leaders are having today.
Okay. So, Ukeme, congratulations on the book, which is awesome. And I read it when it first came out, and then I was rereading it, preparing for this. When you call it immigrant,
Mm,
I love that. You say that immigrants are projected to make up 1 in 5 of the US workforce by 2035. And
yeah.
so in the book, you're talking about why business leaders need to measure the immigrant workforce percentages as another trackable dimension. Can you
Mhm.
explain that, please?
Yeah. So we know about intersectionality. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but the whole
Well,
concept,
for our non-English speaking listeners,
yeah.
define intersectionality first.
Intersectionality is the parts of your identity, the multiple parts of your identity that make up your lived experiences. And so why a workforce should understand the immigrant population is to help them develop from that intersectional point. I'll say it this way. I'm a Black woman, but I'm a Black immigrant woman. So my lived experiences as a Black immigrant woman is very different from a Black woman. I'll give an example, and I talk about this example in the book. When I immigrated to the United States, my first Martin Luther King Day in the United States, right? There's this
Mhm.
expectation that every Black person knows, feels, understands Martin Luther King in the same way. And there was no more visual representation of this than a reporter coming up to me and asking me on MLK Day what MLK meant to me. It was a very awkward encounter. Not because I didn't know who Martin Luther King was, but I hadn't grown up in this country experiencing the same news, information about him, being taught in schools about the same thing. He was just a historical figure for me based on where I was from. So
You
I
were
don't
what,
have,
18 at that
I
point?
was 18 at the time.
Yeah.
So I don't have, that experience. But if you're going to develop me as a Black woman, you miss that intersectionality. You miss that civil rights is not part of the things I learned in my history books. You miss that it doesn't color how I navigate spaces or move in spaces. And so the same can be said of any other type of intersectionality, right? Even a cis white, but with an immigrant dimension to that intersectionality, it's very different. And so that's why I think what happens in corporations is that we just lump people as they are, missing the immigrant experience. And we do that, and we lose an aspect of what's important, an important aspect of who they are.
Well, and one of the things that this makes me think of is how much how people are judged by what they look like. So the color of your skin makes a big difference. And I live half the year in Europe, and I know I look like the Austrians I'm living around, but I'm not. That's not my background. And sometimes I have to say, so who was this person and why was it important? But also, if you have a disability that's invisible. So I can check a couple of the diversity boxes, but you wouldn't know to look at me. And
Correct.
so that's one of the things I think about. Often there have been times when I've been told I can't speak. You have no idea, or you can't speak on that topic. And I said, actually, there is parts of it I can speak on, but
Yes.
you wouldn't know to look at me. So
Yes.
that reporter looked at you and thought, oh, here's somebody who grew up in Atlanta. And yeah, exactly.
Right.
So bearing in mind that the immigrant workforce is more and more a part of our world.
Yeah.
And, people have global teams these days.
Yeah.
Why should we be tracking it and hiring for it?
Yes. Well, I think you hit the nail there. We've become a global workforce, but beyond that, we also have a global marketplace, which means that our consumers of our products and services are not limited to boundaries and borders anymore. In the same way that your workforce is diversifying with immigrants, not just coming from different parts of the state to be there, it's the same way that people that are buying your products are different. And so you track it, and you're able to understand, you're able to adapt your marketing strategies. You're able to be very, very culturally intelligent on how you communicate to your customers about your services. You are able to, your CSR, which is your corporate social responsibility programs, are enriched because you have immigrants in the workforce, and because you can connect that with the people that you're actually serving. So these are just the very quantifiable, off the top of the head, some of the things I talk about in the book of why it is important to understand who your immigrant workforce is. So you're reflecting that back with your customer. You're tying the two.
So what are the aspects of that immigrants have, sort of the grit that immigrants have, that are useful within a team or in leadership? Why should we have more immigrant leaders? Let's put it that way. Unless you're in tech, which seems to have a lot of them. But
yes, this should have Elizabeth, I always kind of start this question with, hey, what makes a great leader, right? And usually when I ask that, they're like, oh, someone that's adaptable, someone that's resilient, someone that does beyond the financials but understands trends. So we usually name off qualities, resourcefulness. And so as I looked at these qualities and I thought about immigrants, now immigrants are not a monolithic group by any means. The only monolithic thing that we have is the experience of leaving our home country and coming to a new place, surviving, thriving in that new place. I don't need to know much about an immigrant's racial background, socioeconomic background, or any of that to know that the very process of leaving one place to another requires adaptability. It requires resourcefulness. It doesn't matter whether you're the king of Persia and have billions. You still have to figure out what bank account are you going to put that money in when you're in the United States. That is all resourcefulness. You still have to rebuild your networks in a new place. And that is stuff that takes a long time. So that takes resilience to do that work. And we know the definition of grit as perseverance, passion over time. And one thing about the immigration process, whether it be the visa process, the rules to stay legal in a country, all the loopholes that we know about being an immigrant in a country, that is sustained passion over a long period of time. Because I'll tell you what, there are many people that don't hack it and pack up their bags and say, you know what? I'm just going to go back to my country. And I've had friends that have done that, right? The ones that sustain, right, and stay, that's grit. And so collectively, as I thought about these common qualities that come out of the immigrant experience, like you actually have to have that immigrant experience for those qualities to come out. I collectively coined that term immigrant, but I mapped that onto all the surveys we see out there, all the data we see out there about all the leadership experts that talk about the qualities of the leaders. And I was like, well, look at that. Of all these top 10 qualities that we want to see in a leader, there's 4 of them smack that come out of the immigrant experience. So why are more of these people that I can say for a fact have this experience, have these qualities, why are they not leaders? And so that's where I was like, okay, we already have these qualities. They need to be leaders.
Easier said than done. So
Right.
you talk a lot about
Easier said than
unconscious.
done.
You talk a lot about unconscious bias in the book, and I'm not going to go into that today, except for talking about language bias. It's also, since I am a presentation skills trainer, I'm a word gal. So tell us a little bit about language bias and how that affects how one is perceived.
Yes. So interestingly, right, I say language is a skill, just like any other skill that we acquire. But for some reason, the English language, we tend to attach intelligence to. It's an unconscious bias. How someone sounds or speaks the English language, we automatically attach their level of intelligence to.
Well, in the US, because English is the main language, I certainly know, like, the French will judge you on how you speak French. And, right. And in the German-speaking countries, it matters a lot what kind of German you speak. So, all right, I'll just put in that little plug for my international listeners here. Okay. Yes. So, English, right. Speaking of in America, the English language.
Yes, we tend to attach intelligence to. And again, like I said, that's completely an unconscious bias, which an unconscious bias means something that your brain just automatically does without you knowing where it comes from. The problem with that, though, and that's why we see a lot of immigrants that are not asked to lead, because we expect to hear them communicate or the accent said in a certain way. But because language is a skill, I think about anyone that has ever tried to learn a language in their adult life. They don't gain mastery even taking it in high school, all the way up to high school. You don't gain mastery of that language in a year. You don't gain mastery of that language in 2 years. Why do we expect that in the workplace if communication is happening? And by communication, I mean what is said is understood and received, and vice versa. That's communication. And that should be the principal goal of how we use language in the workplace, is for communication, but not to attach intelligence to. Because I think I tease about this in the book and kind of tie it with also the foreign education bias pieces. It doesn't matter where you learn chemistry or you learn where the human heart is in the body, if you're a medical doctor, or how math principles that you learn. Your intelligence is the same. It now is to reduce the emphasis on how we want to hear it, which is how do you speak the English language, and focus more on, am I communicating in the workplace with this person, despite the fact they don't roll their R's the same way or sound like me in speaking English.
One of the things that I've always thought about language, and because 30 years in the opera business, how you learned to understand new music is to think as if it's somebody who's speaking to you in a very thick accent. You've got to get used to the way they speak before
Yeah.
you can hear the content of what they have to say. And that
Mm.
translates when you've got someone on your team who speaks a very accented English,
Yeah.
that you have to get used to the way they speak
Yeah.
before you know what they're doing. I work with a lot of international. I work with people from all over the world, so they're not always native English speakers, and we're always adapting. Um,
Mm.
so the thing that there's a language bias,
Mm.
and it's an unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm.
How can we raise our awareness so that we can get past the way someone speaks to get to understand the content of what they have to say?
Yeah. First of all, it really is self-awareness. So the more we talk about this, you kind of raise awareness to it. But I like to say in the workplace, when I talk to leaders, I say, you start first by the people that you put on to give your company-wide presentations. And I ask this
Mhm.
blatantly, how many people give your company-wide presentations that have accents? Besides your technical leaders, like we expect the chief technology officer to be an immigrant or whatever, or we expect maybe the chief financial officer to be an immigrant. Why? Because, they're skilled in math and technology. Beyond those people, what other leader can you put up that speaks with an accent and is allowed to do it in a company-wide presentation? Most
Mhm.
most companies don't, and they haven't because of the unconscious bias, because they think,
Mhm.
oh, this person's going to be understood company-wide or those kind of things. You start to break down some of those barriers, start to raise some awareness of the unconscious bias when you actually start to confront people with it. That is, you put people in the position to speak how they speak at company-wide presentations. And then to your point, we get used to
Mhm.
hearing the
Yes.
accent. It's very prevalent in the workplace. It's seen, it's not unusual
Mhm.
that we have to tune out. It is the way of business.
Mhm.
Then our ears change a little bit, and then we can start to get down to the content, and we're less tied to the accent.
Oh, this is fascinating. I am such a word geek. I could talk to you about this for hours, but let me go on to some of the other questions.
Yeah.
So, Ukeme, for you,
Mm.
we interviewed you about your journey a couple of years ago, and you've done so much since. So you were an engineer, then you were a lawyer. You're
Mhm.
still a lawyer, and then you were on the city council, and now you're the mayor. Uh,
Yeah.
what what are the aspects of your immigrant experience that have really helped you in these career transitions?
Yes. Well, first of all, it's kind of, I hadn't seen it this way till someone brought it up, but it's the comfort with taking the risk. I mean,
Ooh.
people look at my story or look at kind of like the timelines, and it's like, how, having only lived in the city for 3 years, were you not frightened to death about running for public office? And I think
Mhm.
part of that, my immigrant experience, is that I haven't. It's sink or swim sometimes. You've got to be willing to take the risk. And understand that failure may come, but if you don't take the risk, how are you going to know? So I think that comes squarely from my immigrant experiences, not being too afraid to take those
Mhm.
risks. And then the second thing is comfort, that adaptability. I don't know everything. I never will, but I'm confident in my ability to adapt quickly in new
Mhm.
situations, in new rooms, learning new information. Uh, and that directly comes from my immigrant experience. So these pivots have been made better because of my confidence in leaning into those skills that have come out of my immigrant experience.
Good question. Um,
Mm.
you I have to ask the other side of it. Were there aspects of your immigrant experience that made it more challenging for you?
Yes. It's the knowledge gap. So what we'll call maybe cultural norms or some of the history. It's both a challenge and also an opportunity. And it sounds very corporate speak when you use two sides of the coin. But it gives me the opportunity to learn, to always continuously be learning. And because I'm so naive to some of the history and it allows me to actually step out a little bit more than someone that knew more. So I sometimes tease that my story, this brazenness, is because of how naive I am about the full picture. If I knew the full picture, so the challenge is that full picture. If I knew the full picture before I did it, I wouldn't. I'd be frozen in all the bureaucracy and the history and the what has been. So that is a challenge. But once you get into it and you start to learn and know, and the opportunity is to just embrace it and not see it as a challenge, and just feel confident that you can learn it and that you can change it in the position that you're in. So I would say that's been the challenge, is all the unknowns, all the history.
But it's a huge advantage to have an outside view of what's going on.
Yeah.
And to say, well, just because it's never been done this way, why not? Couldn't we do this? So another interesting thing that you talk about, that you mention, is the concept of resilience taking you forward instead of resilience allowing you to bounce back.
Yeah.
And I know that was not your original concept, but tell us about this. We're going to put the information and we're going to put a link in the show notes about this. I love this idea.
So an author, Amma, who I actually interviewed for the book, Marston, is the one that talks about this concept. And she wrote a book called Type R. So Type R people, and these are resilient people that spring forward. We often tend to think about resilience as the ability, like almost like this very rubber band. I'm giving rubber band as a visual because it's this, you stretch and you bounce back, right? And you stretch because of resilience. Resilience is an interesting skill because it comes from challenges. Resilience, you have to be tested. Something difficult has to go on in order for you to develop resilience. You don't just develop resilience by being comfortable. So in a way, it's traumatic, right? But we also have this trauma response when we say, oh, we're resilient, meaning we've endured so much difficulty and we always just bounce back. It doesn't matter what you throw at me, I bounce back, right? Like a rubber band. And I loved her concept of, no, but we actually grow from the difficulty, which is springing forward. So you're not just completely bouncing back and being the same person and throw your, hit me with your best shot, whatever that song is, right? I forget who sings it. It's not just, hey, hit me with every bad thing you have. I will still keep standing and I will rise like the phoenix. The concept is actually you grow. So it's transformative resilience where you grow from the challenge, right? You're a little bit smarter. You're a little bit more aware. If it took you 2 months to recover before, springing forward means now maybe it takes you a month, right? Because you're just mentally stronger. And I see the resilience in immigrants as that. Because they can't even really afford to bounce back. It's like everything inches them into a better version, into a smarter version.
Like a slingshot instead of a rubber band.
Thank you for finishing that meta. Yes. Like a slingshot instead of a rubber band. I like that. Yes.
Okay. I love it. I love it. One more question, because I know your time is precious. Oh, Ms. Mayor. Um,
Thank you.
you have mentioned that
Mm,
learning and development programs
yeah,
tend to put people in a box and try to fit everybody into a box that fits a straight, white, mostly male culture, which is
yeah.
still the majority of where organizations are led.
Hmm.
And you suggest changing that paradigm.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
Mm.
And if you can give us an example, that would be great.
Yes. Well, I think this is a great kind of like culmination of for a question in terms of all that we've talked about so far. The stats are this, that 95% of executive leadership uh, at companies is still white males. So what happens with our leadership development programs is we're developing people based on the success factors or the leadership factors that we see in those 95% white males, as what the successful leader model looks like.
Mhm.
If our pipeline, so I mean our pipeline, the people that are in this leadership development programs are not that, we're trying to force them into a model that is foreign to their being. So earlier we talked about intersectionality, right? We've also kind of talked about unconscious biases. Um, if the people in this pipeline that you're trying to develop into leaders don't sound a certain way, you're going to make them sound a certain way because that's the factor that you see. If their experiences, which I often say, your lived experiences are a value add to your leadership, the vantage point in which you lead from and see things from. If you try to scrub that out, right, you take the magic or the things that have made that person come into your pipeline in the first place out.
Mhm.
So we're doing a disservice to those people in leading. And I often hate the word authentic because it's used,
Mhm.
it's overused in our word and our culture now. Um, but I'm drawing a blank on what other word to use. You fail to develop that person in the magic that brought them to your leadership pipeline in the first place.
So
Um,
what can we do about it then?
what we can do about it is actually, I think I talk about this concept of like cross collaboration projects.
Mhm.
So um, in some of our leadership development programs, we'll put them on an assignment in some place, right? And you'll say we give them like the rubric, which happens to be the 95% male rubric on how to lead that team or how to take that project to an end. And the feedback that we give them is based on um, the original model. What we could instead do, right, is cross them with someone else that is maybe in the 95% and not to give feedback, but to actually learn from their leadership style, right? That's cultural intelligence. Like allow them to lead in their way and almost like kind of like guiding and learning from them in that way. It's like, oh, the feedback goes something like this. I see that you did that differently and I like that. Ordinarily, that wouldn't have been my approach, but I have learned something from your approach rather than the other way where we already feed them the approach. We
Mhm.
let them lead, right? We let them lead and learn from that process when they have led differently and it has still shown success.
Wow. Wow, I love that. I think it's a much larger conversation. Everybody just go buy the book because it's great to hear about this. Ukeme, I'm so grateful to have
Yeah.
you as a guest. If somebody's listening to me and says, wow, this is amazing, but where do I start?
Yeah.
Is there one thing that somebody could do today, as soon as they finish listening to this, that about not leaving money on the table by not taking advantage of the immigrants in your organization?
Yeah. So, as part of writing the book, I came up with this, I'd call it a guideline, a starting kind of like plan on how to build effective immigrant leadership pipelines. And so if your listeners go to www.immigrantbook.com, there's a spot there to just download that guide. It's just my freebie 5 principles on some things that they can start doing to build that pipeline. And so that's available on the website for them to do that.
Great. Well, Ukeme Awakessien Jeter, thank you so much, my friend. I just, I bugged you for months to get you on. I finally got you, so I'm so happy. Thank you so much for having been a guest on Speakers Who Get Results. And listeners, if you'd enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to us on whatever podcast app you listen to. We've got 5 years of fabulous content. And follow us on YouTube, follow us on social media. Tell your friends. That would be great. Tell your friends so we have more people who can listen to wisdom from amazing guests like Ukeme. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, and I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.